So a few days ago, Michael Knowles tweeted this. Why would a guy who could paint the picture on the left choose to paint the picture on the right? I think this evidences the need for some basic art history and art appreciation amongst tons of people. I answered a question like this a few years back on Quora. It's one of my most read answers about Pollock, and it's similar. It's one of the reasons why contemporary art has lost so much of the audience, is because there's been a lack of understanding as to what the arts have been considering and dealing with for some time now. So my hope in answering this is that I will convince someone like Michael Knowles that they need to get educated, and actually it can help serve them in a lot of ways, because I want to end with a really famous Picasso painting that I think is one of the best works of art, and I'm thankful that it exists. But I think what this question highlights is that most likely what Michael Knowles values in art is the ability to make realistic renderings of something that might have actually occurred. And on top of that, I think for them to be meaningful, I can't help but think of Michael's Catholic proclivities and the ideas that are represented on the left, of a sick man with clearly a religious object above him being attended to by some sort of nun figure. There's probably lots of elements here that Michael identifies with and enjoys. And there's plenty of things that I enjoy about it as well. And the image on the right is clearly ugly and disgusting and quite repulsive. The question, why would you paint the one on the right, is legitimate. What's interesting to me is so many people ask that question and they assume the answer is there's no good reason. But I assure you, Picasso is pretty smart. I want to start by looking at this painting. This is Las Meninas by Diego Velázquez in 1656. Arguably one of the best paintings ever made, especially in this kind of classic tradition of painting that is about reflecting and interpreting, almost as if it's an illusion, to make a painting that looks so real we might mistake it for real life. And you can see, fascinations with that. Oscar Wilde famously in The Portrait of Dorian Gray explores that idea. But so we have here, Vasquez is the court painter, and he paints the king and the queen, but also the princess, Las Meninas. So you can see a high degree of accuracy, one of the best paintings of a child, actually. But I want to note the obvious sense of content. This is the king and the queen in the mirror reflected on the wall, the court ladies, the dwarfs, the dog. All of it is a setting that very few people on the planet actually would ever see themselves in. And we can see, in a sense, the painter is serving the people who can afford to buy a painting. How do you get a king to buy a painting? You make a painting of him, most likely, and then he supports you. So Velázquez lived in the Prado. He was also a decorator and architect for the king, but he was serving the king. And so the paintings, to some degree, serve at least the vanity of the king. I think that's a little bit why the king and queen are in a mirror. But we move forward a little bit. This is Jacques-Louis David. Josephine kneels before Napoleon during his coronation at Notre Dame. And again, you see this beautiful, realistic rendering. Look at the details, the fabric curtains in the background. Look at the ornate clothing everyone is wearing, how perfectly posed they are. It would be very easy to interpret this as a painting in which the artist serves as a camera, watching and translating everything that they see. And it's epic. It's great, serving the strange emperor who famously crowned himself instead of the Pope crowning him, supposedly. Who knows? I wasn't there. But you'd be mistaken. I want to show you what the interior of Notre Dame before the fire actually looked like. There aren't square pillars, there's round ones. Those archways are so tall you can see people in the background. Napoleon, famously worried about being short, supposedly, in this image comes off as a massive giant in comparison to that architecture. The architecture is shrunk. There's seating put up in the back here. That seating does not exist. It literally doesn't exist. You see, the painter, even though it looks photorealistic almost, is constructing an image for the sake of something. In this case, I would argue it's empirical propaganda. All of that idea that what an artist is doing is translating their particular view of reality. They're translating and filtering. They are distilling something down. Is this better than what the real thing was like. Was there a baby crying like most church services? Was there, distractions? Quite possibly. Artists have constantly been doing what Hitchcock said when he's like, a film is real life with all the boring parts edited out. Artists have been doing this, and the painters have been doing it as well. And in that process, at the same time, right, this the Coronation painting is 1805, 1807. The camera gets invented. This is probably the earliest photograph we know that survived, 1826 to 1827. You can see suddenly there's going to be a major shift very quickly. This is 1839 for this portrait. We can start getting portraits of not just rich and famous people, though it started off that way, but the camera allows all of us to start getting portraits. I love that famous Norm Macdonald joke about the every old man had one photograph of himself and it took 5 hours. That was what it was like, but that made it far more accessible. And so you can see this didn't take very long. This is 1827, 1839, 12 years, and we already get from that blurry image to this. Let alone, we give it more time, 1908, we have color photographs. This is Mark Twain, and this is what the painters are having to deal with. If the painter's job was to capture reality, they're really slow at it compared to a camera. And the camera is literally beating them at their job. And so what does every single company, creative endeavor do when they start to become irrelevant? They pivot. And that's where we start getting weird images like this. So this is The Treachery of Images, 1928. This is sort of, we're jumping a little bit forward from Picasso, the painting we saw at the beginning, but this is René Magritte really pointing out this idea. So it says in French, this is not a pipe, it's a painting of a pipe. So much of art and art history was wrapped up in this idea that what they were doing was translating the real thing. And he's pointing out, no, it was not the real thing. It's a translation. It is the artist's distillation of the thing. And, nowadays we'll even see that this has come into photography as well. But even to this day, photographs are seen as evidential. They can be used in court as evidence of a specific thing because we know that to take a photograph, the actual thing has to be there in order for the photons to hit the film. No one has ever used a painting at the scene of a crime to say this is evidence of what occurred because we know that the artist is filtering it. Why would Picasso make this painting? So this is The Weeping Woman. 1937 is when this was painted. So that's pretty late in Picasso's career. Let's look at this. This is The Old Guitarist, 1903. This is a part of Picasso's Blue series. So you can begin to see he's obviously got the rendering skills, but this almost looks like a corpse. Clearly, if it is holding that guitar, this dead man is in rigor mortis or something, holding on to it. But you can start to see how painting is dealing with that photo, the fact that the photograph of Mark Twain is possible. Because if the photo can capture the reality, we don't need the painters to do it anymore. So what can they do? What they can do is heighten reality. And this, I think, will speak directly to folks like Michael Knowles, because this is similar to poetry or music. Why do we play music at wonderful events? Because it heightens and focuses our senses on the beautiful thing. That's what film has been doing for decades. This ability of the artist to heighten the reality, to make this old guitarist even more decrepit, covered in this blue hue. It's as if some sort of incredibly somber song can be pouring out of that guitar. I would argue most people can probably hear this song better because of the blue hues, because of the exaggeration, than if it was a photograph of this guitarist. And this sort of brings into the whole entire movement of Cubism. Feel free to read about this, but a lot of what the Cubists are doing are thinking, well, what exactly is a painting of a person? Because really, we're only looking at their face. We're looking at the front side of their body. What about the back side of their body? How can you say you've painted or captured an object or a person if we're not even seeing all three dimensions of that thing? So the Cubists start twisting and changing and thinking, well, the photo can only look from, there's only one lens on a camera. Well, us painters have two eyes, and we can move around and we can create dense collages, so to speak. And that's where you start getting things like this. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that French word. My French is terrible. But this is a harem of prostitutes from Avignon. The year for this one is 1907. So this is the same year as that portrait of Mark Twain. And you can see it's taking on and thinking about what are the different views, how does the body move. And I can imagine for Picasso was someone who was quite well acquainted with prostitutes. I imagine he's thinking about his interactions with them and how do you capture that, and how do you take on all of the carnal bliss and the carnal depravities of engaging with women, and how do you portray that accurately in a painting. You can photograph it, which will then become in one sense arguably pornographic, but it's still like, does the photograph or even the film capture that in its essence? It's similar to what he's getting at with the old guitarist, where he's trying to use paint to get at the feeling and ideas and the emotions so that an audience member can experience it themselves. And I think what's particularly interesting about this is we have so much of art history glorifying and sexualizing women's bodies. Cubism comes in, and I'm, as a man who's interested in the female form, this is not sexually enticing. In fact, it's quite disgusting. The emphasis on the eyes looking back at you, I can't help but imagine that perhaps Picasso had some sense of guilt for the ways in which he was using these women and benefiting from it. And I'm sure even as this is a very famous painting, I imagine for Picasso there might have been some degree of guilt. But where is this all going? So why would we care about this weeping woman? How do you capture someone who's in tears? I think this recalls to me some of the overacting of the soap operas of like the 1980s and 1990s. But it's powerful. It's visceral. It's repulsive. And that's what he's getting at. He's not trying to produce a beautiful image, because art can do far more than just comfort us and decorate our spaces. It can challenge us. And to me, all of this leads to, like, you don't need to like this painting. I personally don't like it. I don't want to look at it for very much longer. So I'm going to switch tabs soon. But it leads to what I think is one of the most powerful works of art, and that is this image here, Guernica. So I want to explain what this image is about first before we look at it in too much detail. But so the bombing of Guernica in the 26th of April, 1937, was part of the Spanish Civil War before leading up to World War II, in which Nazi-backed Franco forces air-raided a village, the town of Guernica, for hours on end, dropping thousands of pounds of bombs. You can read more about it here. It was the market day. There were more than 10,000 people present. Estimates at the time, the estimates that Picasso was receiving were in the thousands of dead. Most historians agree that most likely it was about 300. But you had bombers dropping on a town mostly filled with women and children, because all of the men were off fighting. And fighter planes were strafing people as they ran from the city through the fields for hours. I think it's something like a five hours, where the planes themselves were never actually shot at. So they were just bombarding this place. And this is one of the first instances of the realities of our technology-infused mechanistic warfare and what it does to people. And so how do you capture an image like that? You've got these photographs, and this is devastating, but it also reminds me of some of the things you see in Rome. If you go walk, it's like the ruins there. It's the same. The photographs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they are visceral, but they're ghostly. I don't really feel the anguish of what it was like to be there. And so we have Picasso painting this. What greater medium is there to demonstrate women and children being blown apart by bombs dropped from the skies than Cubism? The ultimate shifting and tearing, the detaching the body, legs, faces turned into ghosts almost, screams. I love the triangle tongue of the horse. All of it is an outpouring. None of it, this harkens back to his blue period in a sense. It's very black and white and blue. I personally haven't seen this in person, but so I can't argue towards the accuracy of this image's color. But he doesn't use bright reds and yellows or greens like the weeping woman. The composition, the deconstruction of the form, and the screams can be felt in their silence. And all of it with that strange eye near the displacing the center, almost at the top of a pyramid in the sense of the construction of the image. And inside of that is a fake light bulb. And I love that ghostly spirit holding the candle, the oil burning lamp just beside it, but the light bulb is above. It must be the source of that devastation. This is where I get to, so back to Knowles' question. Why, if you could paint the picture on the left, would you paint the picture on the right? Because it can emote more. Because it's not enslaved to what you see, but is what you feel. To me, this is the development of painting beyond depiction of life into poetic interpretation of life. And this is one means. Cubism, Picasso was a champion of Cubism. You don't have to enjoy Cubism, but I hope you can appreciate what these artists were trying to do and how they too were scrambling to adjust to a world that was being overwhelmed by technology at a fast pace. And they didn't know what they were doing or what would be the impact. But what it ultimately led to was, in my mind, one of the best anti-war, anti-slaughter of innocents, and the most accurate depictions of the screams trampled, destroyed people. And I don't think that we could look at it if it was photographic interpretations of the dead bodies. I mean, we've seen the history of that through journalism and war photography and where it has come, and how there are questions of, are you glorifying the death of people? Are you being a voyeur into that disgustingness? Is it encouraging others to treat others the same? And I don't think there's any degree of voyeurism in this. Rather, it's a meditation, an imagining of the horrors. And we don't need a particular face to see them, because it doesn't matter if this is just Guernica. How could this not be Hiroshima or Nagasaki or any other genocided, massacred people, especially at the hands of technology that allows you to remove the trigger so far away so that you can rain down hellfire, so to speak, from disassociated with the horrors of what you're seeing. That's why Picasso, in my opinion, painted the way he did.